All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another session of Money Matters Monday on Monday with Hung Lu. I'm with Cash Property Inc. And so we will get going today. Today, I've got two questions that I'm going to answer, and I should be able to answer both questions together in the same streaming because it's sort of in the similar line. So before you go and implement what I'm going to share with you, please go and check with somebody else. Just because I've been able to be very successful in real estate, I've got a different level of risk tolerance, right? And a different level of understanding when it comes to the actions that I've taken within real estate. So before you go and implement it, please just go check with somebody else. And if I'm, sharing anything that is questionable or, not 100% in alignment with what you're thinking, please reach out to me. Happy to continue the conversation, to expand on it, to learn where you're coming from with your thinking. Happy to do that. Always learning myself as well. So let's do this. So let's do a big shout out to the group that came to the Friday mastermind. So last Friday, we had a group session, 2 hours straight of just talking about real estate. And one of the questions that came up, which I'm going to walk through today, because I've actually never done this analysis. It's always just been one that's, been in my head. And I'm just like, oh, yeah, for sure, that's the answer. But let's now put some numbers behind it to actually show and support that thought process. All right. So the question that came up from that monthly mastermind, and so a big shout out to the group, Addie, Lana, you guys are regulars, always coming on. Josh, you as well. And who else was on that call? There's always, 5 or 10 of us that shows up. So, Cam and Dean, thank you for always showing up. You guys are such big supporters of my work, and it's great to be in that consistent mindset group. So love communicating and sharing that time with you. Bavin as well. Let's see who else. Okay, I'm just going off the top of my head here, and so I apologize if I've missed anybody. But thank you. Like that monthly mastermind is something that I look forward to, and so always happy to share ideas. Okay, so let's go into this calculation question here. So the question is, what strategy have I done that where I've had the biggest consistent return? Okay. And I get this question asked once in a while, like, hey, Hong, do you prefer to do private lending or BRRRR? Where do you make your passive income from? Okay. So when I first heard that question at the mastermind, it sort of took me aback because I'm like, well, wait a minute. I make income from my rentals. So I've got properties all across Canada and I get monthly income from that. And then I also do private lending and, like with my own cash, and I help other investors fund their deals or, do rentals or buy properties. And I sort of act like the bank. And so there's private money that I lend out for what I would consider almost passive income that way, because I get some sort of income every single month from that private lending. So which one of those two strategies, which I'm in, the private lending and the BRRRR, which one has given me the largest consistent return? Okay. So on the mastermind, I did ask for clarification because I'm like, well, wait a minute. Are you looking for the largest consistent return for living or the largest consistent return for generational wealth? Okay. Because both of those are two very different things. And private lending and BRRRR are two different types of incomes. Like one is taxed at a higher rate, and the BRRRR method, that income is taxed differently. So, and the generational wealth income is taxed differently too. So let's go into the calculation here and let's work this out because I'm interested to see exactly which one of those strategies really would have given me the largest, most consistent income. Okay, so on your screen, you should see the Excel sheet, and I'm just going to make it bigger so that as I'm typing away here, you guys can see it. So with private lending, okay, I've been doing private lending for about 8 years now. And when I started out, I was doing like 100,000 at a time. and then eventually moving up to 200,000, 300,000, all the way up to like $1 million. So now for 8 years, I've been doing that now. So out of, so when you lend out, or when I lend out 100,000, the interest rates can be anywhere from, let's say, 10% to 15%, right? Especially now in today's economy, we're looking at 15% plus fees, plus legals, right? So fees plus legals and plus admin, right? There's actually admin fee too. So legals plus admin, okay? And that can be anywhere from 2 to the highest one that I've heard somebody do was 9%. So which is crazy. Okay. So you've got that. Okay. So if you do the math on this, okay, so if we're in, let's say, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, and we're going all the way down, and we're just going to take this out to year 10, let's just say. Okay, so we're going to start with 100,000, and then we're going to get 10% return on that money. So at the end of that year, we're going to actually make $10,000. So it's pretty easy to see, the math on that. And then at the end of the year, what you would have is 110,000. Okay. Now, what you could do is you can take that 110, and so at the end of the year, that person, the borrower, would pay you back that 100,000. You would take that 100 plus the 10,000 that they give you, and then you go do another deal. Okay. Or you can take that 100,000 and renew it with them, and take that 10,000 and go and actually live off of that. So that's what I was doing. I was actually recycling the 100,000 consistently every year, let's say, and then reinvesting it to a borrower, a fellow investor, for anywhere from 10 to 12 to 15%, and then living off of this income. So let's just say this one year I got 12%. Okay. So then that second year I would get 12,000, and then I would live off of that. So then I would then at the end of that year have like 112,000. But now you're thinking, well, Huong, you spent that 12,000, so you technically don't have that money anymore. So you're correct there. So that's why at the beginning of the year, I would always just sort of have 100,000. And that was, and then this is the 10,000 that I was living off of. So if I was to continue, okay. So hopefully that went on. Back to where I stopped. I don't know what happened. My camera completely kaputs. That's what happens when you're living on an island for the summer. Internet is, I'm just lucky to get internet. Okay. So, okay. So if your question, let me share my screen. I think that got unshared. Okay. So I'm just going to keep going on with this calculation here. So on the screen, you should see the Excel sheet again. So if at this point you're like, Huong, you can't live off of 12,000, 15,000, whatever the amount is you're thinking in your head, you're absolutely right. Like that's not enough to live off of. But when you're up to 500,000, let's just say, and you're doing that in private lending, at 12%, that's 60,000 for the year. Okay. That's a decent size income for somebody. Okay. If you're up to like 750, okay, I'm just going to go up here and I'm just going to change this to 750. At 12%, you're at $90,000. Like think of the scalability of private lending, which was one of the reasons why I got into it. Because as my you know, as I was doing like 100, 200, 300, and then the next year I was able to leverage from some of my other investments and then pull that cash out to do private lending. I was able to scale up my private lending, you know, quite fast, because as you make more income from another source, you bring it in and then you just keep that going. Okay. And then if you have access to a HELOC, okay, well, then you can tap into that HELOC whenever you're getting ready to do a private lending and be like instantly being able to bump up your loan amounts. So, you know, on some HELOCs, you know, you're getting about, you know, 3% on mortgage pay down. And so if you're getting 3% every single month on mortgage pay down, that's potentially 3% that you can contribute in terms of funds for your private lending. Okay. So now let's just say for, you know, for whatever reason, I did not use this fund, use the interest to live off of. And so now this money would be recycled into next year. And the next year, I would either increase the loan amount and then charge interest on that, or I could go find a new lender, sorry, a new borrower and give them that money. Okay, so now I'm just going to copy this over so you could see the effect of what happens to the numbers. So then in the second year, I'm going to lend out the full amount that I've incurred. So the 100,000 plus the 10% interest of the 10,000. So I'm going to reinvest that 110,000 to a borrower. They're going to pay me 12%. So now you can see the interest went from 1320 from 1200, yeah, no, sorry, 12,000 to 13,200. So it went up by 1,200. So this is that whole compounding effect. Like I'm making interest now on the interest. So I'm charging 12% now on that 10,000 that I made from the previous year. So now at the end of year 2, I've got 123,200. Okay, so now I'm going to keep this going year over year. Okay, so as you can see, by the end of the 10th year, okay, I'm going to go back and make this 100,000 here. So at the end of my 10th year, I would have $305,000 in this 100,000. Like if I did nothing else, but just kept the interest going, compounding in on it, I would have 305,000 compared to this one where I was just pulling the cash out and living on it. Okay. So that is 112,000. Okay. So now let's look at the situation where if I was to buy a property, hold on to it, and just do the BRRRR method, and then, you know, refinance and do all of that every single year. Okay, so which one would have given me the largest consistent return? Okay, so let's just say in that first year, I had 100,000 and I was able to buy a property for $100,000. Okay, you can't do that anymore in today's situation, but back in, you know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, you could buy a property in Toronto for about 150,000. Okay, so in that first year, so let's just say I take the 100,000, I buy a place. Okay, so now I'm paying interest, the bank mortgage, I'm paying property taxes, insurance, blah, blah, blah. Like I'm paying all of that. So let's just say, and also because in my first house, I was house hacking. So I was living in one unit and then renting out the other spaces. So yeah, house hacking before I even knew what house hacking was. Okay, so the interest or the gains that I would have seen on this. So let's just assume that the rents that I got coming in just basically was enough to cover all the expenses. So I was living rent-free, which is, you know, the premise of house hacking. Okay, so now what I would have gained from buying a property in Toronto was the appreciation. Okay, so I'm going to put in here the appreciation. And I'm just going to go with 10% appreciation because in Toronto, we were seeing ups and downs. On average, if you trend it up, you know, it's upwards of 10%. Okay, there were times where Toronto did do a bit of a dip. So even at the dip part, maybe 8%. Okay, appreciation across Canada, if you average it out, is around 3 to 4%. So for Toronto, like BC area, even 8%. So we'll put that in and we'll just run it down. Okay. Now I also had mortgage pay down. And mortgage pay down is the pay down. Okay. So mortgage pay down is the principal that I'm paying down year over year or month over month with my mortgage payments going to the bank. So this 100,000 would be going down. Okay. And this 100,000 is amortized over 20, 25, 30 years. I think at the time when I got my first mortgage, I think it was only 25 years. Okay. Now the interest rate though at that time was 9 or 10%. So which is like this private lending scenario that we were doing. Okay. But right now we know that the rates are, 5, 6%, right? So, okay. So now I'm going to say my mortgage pay down, let's just say it's 3%. Okay. So that means that in total, I'm getting my 8% plus 3%. So I'm putting in these numbers because then you can go around and you could play with it. So that means at the end of the first year, I would be getting very similar to what this private lending was, $11,000. So then my gain here would be plus this, plus the 11,000. Okay. So that means at the end of the first year, my gain in value would have been 111,000. Now I don't have access to this 1,100 right away. Like that just sits in the property and until I refinance. Okay. Now, if I had a HELOC, I could access some of this right away and I can then use that HELOC and dump it into the dump it into the private lending stream that I have going on. Okay. So now this 1,100 would sit in there and it would basically carry over for the next year. And then this calculation here, I'm just going to copy that right down. Okay, so as you can see now, this 100,000 now is going to sit in there and get recycled in. Okay, so now I'm going to have 123, and then this is going to keep cycling over. Okay, and it's going to go all the way down. So now how come if I'm getting 11% here, how come this is not increasing more? Why is that? 255. Oh, I see. Because at this point, I went up to 12%. Okay. So there's a lot of ifs here because if this is at 12% and I'm only getting, let's say, 11% here, then the private lending would give more cash, more profit at the end of the 10 years. Okay. So let's go back and let's just say, yeah, so if I change this to 11, it's pretty much going to be the same numbers. Okay. So now let's just say for example here, I'm going to go down because I want to just decrease this a little bit. Okay. So let's just say that doing the BRRRR method, I actually only get about 10% a year in gain. Okay. My mortgage and everything, insurance, taxes, everything is being paid for by the cash flow coming from the property. So I'm basically breaking even on the cash flow. So let's just say that on average, the house is having a very passive appreciation plus the mortgage pay down equaling 10%. So at the end of the 10 years, I would have 259K in value. Okay. So let's just say that I now go and I refinance this. Okay. The house would have gone up and I would be able to pull out a significant amount here. Okay. Now, this is really a forced savings account. I can't take this 10,000, 11,000, 12,000. I can't take this out and go and spend it like the way I was doing with the private lending cash coming in. Okay. So that's one of the benefits of the BRRRR method is that the cash is literally forced to sit in there. And, you don't really want to pull out HELOC funds for living because you're charged at a higher rate. Okay. So in terms of larger consistent returns, I would say that the BRRRR method is way better. okay, because you're sort of forced to leave the cash in there and you're forced to save that money. So at the end of the 5 years, so this is 5 years here, okay, I would have about 161,000. I could refinance, okay, I could renew, okay, which is not ideal. But if I was to refinance this property, even though, you know, here it's saying it's 161, if I got the appraisal done and the appraisal came back and said, well, the property is actually worth 500,000, well, then I could actually refinance and pull out close to about $400,000 of that cash. And then basically have 400,000 to go and invest and do other things after paying off whatever my existing mortgage is. Okay. So let's just say the house value went up to 500,000. Oh, I'm missing a zero there. Okay. If I was able to tap into 400,000, okay, so the bank would give me $400,000. I would pay off my existing mortgage, right? Pay down that balance. So that new balance, let's just say, would be, you know, maybe 85,000. Okay. That means that I would have close to $315,000 now in cash that I can go and take and do another investment. Okay. I can't do that with private lending. Private lending is whatever money you put in, whatever interest you've made, that's the value, that's the cash. Okay. Whereas with the BRRRR, you can get an appraisal done and then you can refinance and pull out that value. Okay. Which is insane. Like if you think about it, okay. So if you're thinking, Huong, there's no way that your property went up to 500,000. Oh yeah, it totally did. Right. Okay, so the other thing to keep in mind here is the risk level. Okay, so I'm just going to put this in here. So when you have a property, a BRRRR, it's your property. There's like, okay, there's a bunch of other risks, like your tenants don't pay rent, you know, there's flooding. Okay, especially in Toronto now over the past weekend with the big rainstorm. Okay, but in terms of the risk level, it's not the same as with private lending. Your property is your property. Okay, the value of this property might go down to zero appreciation. Okay, yes, it could even be negative appreciation, but at least you still have a property. Okay, so let's just say your property here. Okay, so I'm going to go here and let's just say we're going to dump it down here. Let's just say you have negative 2% appreciation. Okay, but you're doing mortgage pay down. Okay, so that means there's really been a gain in value of a 1%. Okay, so $1,000. So even if there was negative appreciation, which we've seen in Alberta, maybe Saskatchewan and Manitoba area, not ideal. Okay, but at least you still, one, have that property. You still have mortgage pay down. Okay, our cash flow is considered even. Okay, you're still at least making $1,000. At least you still have a property, physical property that you own. Okay, so that's one risk level around the BRRRR. Now with private lending, if somebody like if you lend your money and that person doesn't pay you back, and let's just say take off and go to, where would somebody take off to if they stole your money? I don't know, Barbados or Switzerland or something. Okay, so they take off. Okay, so then your 100,000, you would have to foreclose on that property if you can, and potentially not, like you could potentially lose this 100,000, all of it. Plus you would lose this 10,000. Okay, so with private lending, you have the potential to lose 100%. Okay, it's not a guarantee that you're going to lose 100%, but there's the potential that you'll lose that 100%. So now if your borrower defaults, and let's just say you get 50% of it back, okay, you started with 100,000 in there. So now if you can get 50% back, okay, simple math, you get 50,000, you've lost 50,000. That's a lot of money. That's, you know, the equivalent of a salary for somebody for one full year. So Now, there's things that you could do afterwards to go and get the remaining 50,000 that is lost. You can go after them personally. You can go to, yeah, so you could take other legal routes, but that takes time, that takes effort, that takes energy to go and do that. Okay, so not the greatest for growing large, consistent returns. Okay, it's not generational wealth in that sense. So some people I know who do private lending, they take the cash out and they roll that back into their business, or they roll it into like their next real estate deal. Like they do this temporarily for a year, 2 years, so that they can build up the cash. So let's say in 5 years, they have 173. Well, now they take that cash and they go and use that as a down payment for another property. Okay. So if you're using that cash for something else, then it totally makes sense. Okay, so let's see. So I think that's all I have to say about that question about the largest consistent returns. I would say hands down, the BRRRR method is way better. So let's go into here. I'm going to turn this into 10%. Oop, missed that there. And I'm going to put this all back to 7. Yeah, so if I got consistently 10% in private lending and I got consistently 10% from the appreciation and mortgage pay down from BRRRR, at the end of the day, they would work out to be the same. But the BRRRR has the potential to have way more because of the actual appreciation and the cash flow component, which we just basically said in this case, it would be 0. Okay. And then also because the risk factor of not like, there's no way you could lose 100% of your house value. Like even if there was a fire, you would have insurance. Okay. Okay, so now there's like title fraud and stuff like that. We're not even going to go into that type of scenario. Okay, so that is the answer to that question. Okay, which has consistently given me large returns in real estate? I would say definitely the BRRRR method. Okay, and it's the same idea. Like if you want to change what I wrote here for private lending and put flip on that, it's the same type of idea. Flipping is a one-time large capital influx of cash to you because you did a successful BRRRR, but you have to reinvest that into the next opportunity to get that capital to grow, which is where the BRRRR is automatically forcing that appreciation and the appreciation and the forced savings account. Okay, so now one of the questions that came in was, how do I calculate the interest on a loan? Okay, so we basically went through that here. So if you had $100,000 and you were being charged 10%, it would just be the 100,000 times your 10%, and then that would be your yearly fee. Okay, so that would be 10%. So I'm just going to copy that down here to show it a little bit here. So it's 100,000 times 10% to get your $10,000. So to figure out for the monthly amount, you take the 10,000 divided by 12. So you are going to be paying $833.33 or 34 cents. Okay, so now let's just say you go to 200,000. Okay, well then it just doubles. Okay, if you are at, let's say 14% on a loan, okay, then the annual fee would go up to 28,000 and you'd be paying $2,333.33. Okay, so that's how that works. If you go to 300,000, so one of the ways that I like to show this is just having a scale here. So let's go back to 100,000. And then we're basically copying this down. Okay. And we're going to go 200,000 here. So you could do like a bunch of tables here to show it. Oh, that's not going to work here. Okay. Like there. So that's one way to build a table, is just to say, okay, if it went up by 100,000 for each one, and the interest rate is 14%, okay, then my monthly payments, if it's 100,000, would be 1,166. If it was 2,000, it would be 233.3. If it's 3,000, then it's 3,500. So you could see the increase in your fees every single month. Okay. So keep in mind that with private lending, it is a very short term, like 6 months to a year, at the most 2 years. You don't want to be in this high interest rate for a very, very long time. Okay, so that is it for today, everybody. Thank you so very much for watching. If you've got any questions or any comments, please feel free to reach out to me. Happy Monday, everybody. Bye-bye.